Hi everybody, I hope y'all are doing well. Today I wanted to talk about the topic of fear, more specifically fear tied to losing the sense of self. So I've received this question since I started uploading videos regarding non-duality. This has been kind of it's been the main question. Although I haven't addressed it in a video format, I've emailed those people my thoughts on that, but I thought I'd make a video so that anybody else that has this fear of losing the sense of self can have some kind of context to what it really is, and hopefully dispel some of that fear that comes with the idea of losing the sense of self. So what may happen is that you may be drawn to watch these videos, non-duality videos, or maybe read a non-duality type of book, or maybe you've had an experience, a glimpse, or something that has brought you very close to losing the sense of self, and then suddenly you felt contracted, you felt fear, you felt panic, and you've stopped. So this seems to be very common. What happens is that strong emotions such as like fear, anger, all those sorts of emotions, they carry a lot of energy that contracts, that gets stuck. So, you may be having the idea of losing the sense of self, everything's flowing, you're understanding, or you're seeing that this is something that for whatever reason you're drawn to, for whatever reason you feel this is what's going to happen. Then suddenly you get very close to losing the sense of self and a fear rises. And it contracts, it stops, it gets stuck there. And you feel it, and it can turn into panic, it can turn into anxiety, it can turn into turning off those non-duality videos, or leaving that behind for a while, or, asking these questions to gain some sort of context as whether or not losing the sense of self is truly harmful. So fear arises when there's something to be feared. Sometimes there's anxiety and things that arise for absolutely no reason. They're irrational fears. With losing the sense of self, in a way, there's a rational explanation for it, because you can feel that maybe if you don't understand this or hasn't happened, you haven't gone that far, you can maybe understand this in a way that may be a bit scary. So I've heard lots of non-duality speakers, I've watched their videos, and a lot of times they're using a radical approach, which I have a lot of respect for. It's not the way that I came to non-duality or the way that I speak about non-duality, but I certainly see the benefits of really just stripping down everything in that person to really realize that there's no one there. And that's if it was a sort of therapy or sort of tactic to it, that's what they're using. And it's because it's very simple, but the mind can't really grasp it. So everything has to kind of be torn down. And that's why they use the terminologies that they do. And I completely understand it. It makes total sense now. But to the person I feel like before they come to this realization, it is a bit scary to hear there's no you're not doing this, there's no death, there's no life, you don't have a life, you don't have a mother, you don't have a daughter, you don't have a life. So all of these things can be really scary to the person, because the person is very invested in the self. The person is whoever they are. And, whether that be they're very tied to their career, I'm a teacher, and so they're very tied to these things. Or maybe they're very tied to their religion. I'm a Christian. Or they're very tied to their family. I have a mother and father. Or maybe they're very tied to something in their life that they identify with. And when someone's telling them that all of that's just going to fall away and they're not going to have those beliefs, they're no longer going to be a Christian. What if they're in a family where everybody is a Christian, and losing the sense of self maybe is something that for whatever reason, they're on that path. But the thought of losing that whole identity of religion, or that whole identity of whatever they are in their career or whatever their beliefs are, can be very scary to the person, because then what happens? Who are they? What is it that can happen from there? It just seems like there's nothing. And you also hear a lot of the speakers speak about, this is nothing. There is nothing. There is nothing happening. There is no time. There is no space. There is no you. So all of these things can be very scary. I mean, just for the normal person, let's say I lose my job. It can be very depressing to lose a sense of a part of oneself. So if you're very tied to your career, just generally, aside from this non-duality thing, if you are very tied to something and that's taken from you, it can be very devastating and scary. And the thought of, coming to this message and losing the sense of self, and then maybe suddenly you lose your interest in your work, or you lose your interest in your life, or your beliefs, or your passions, because those things actually don't matter, can be very scary to the person, to the ego, if you want to call it that. So when those sorts of messages are heard, within this non-duality speakers, it can be very scary. So when you start to get very, very close, but then you get hit with, there is no one doing this. You don't have a life. You don't have anything. There's nothing to do, nothing to gain. It can be very scary, because your next question is, well, how will I live? How will I support myself? How will I love my family? How will I have a social life? How will anything happen? How will I eat? How will I take care of myself properly? The truth is, everything continues as it was. Some things may only really improve. So if there is a conflict between something that you're doing or a belief system you have, that'll fall away if it doesn't benefit you. But if it benefits you, it'll continue. So there's really nothing to fear. There can be an upheaval in someone's life, but in the end, it's growing you to who you authentically are. So if it were that your career falls away because you no longer align with that, or it no longer serves you, you'll actually elevate to something that is more authentic and more true to your gifts, to who you are. And in the end, when you're aligned to all of those things, everything just flows better. You will have a salary. You will be able to support yourself. You'll be able to do these things. It's just a process. But generally, everything stays the same. If you do want to have this awakening and then, continue your life just as it was, that's also okay. That's also what's happening. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. I try to make these videos to make it more relatable, because nothing really changes. It's like your perspective or your view of the world and what reality is changes without the sense of self. But I still do everything that I've ever done. Yes, some changes have happened, but they've only been positive ones. I can't say anything very negative has happened. I guess the most negative thing that has happened is really just being present with emotions and things that happen that may be considered bad, like suffering, anger, anxiety, all that stuff. Sitting really in that for however long, that can be uncomfortable. But in the end, you have like a big release, like a sigh, like, okay, that's over. And it's really over. You don't keep experiencing the anger over this issue. So that's probably the hardest part about all of this. The rest of it is all in line with your true authentic self. There's nothing to fear. Those are just blocks and walls that the ego puts up to stop you from going there. because it hears things that threaten it. And it is threatened when the ego, when it's seen that there's no self, the ego is still there, but it's back here. It's not front and center. It's somewhere else. And it may every so often throw in a thought, throw an idea, throw in a plan, a scheme, or something. But it's clearly seen for what it is, and it's no longer the driver of life. Life is just doing life. Ego tries to make it seem like it's in control of this life, but it's not. It never has been. So this whole time, there's already not been a self. There's already not been anything. There's just been this ego acting like it's doing this. And it's not doing it. It's just faking it. And when it's seen for what it is, then it's just like, oh, you got me. And it just goes back here and just hides. And every so often it tries to make its comeback. But there's no coming back. Once there's no self, there's no self. Everything deepens. So, like your relationship with your family or friends. A lot of people are fearful that, oh, if there's no self, then I'm just going to be a zombie. My kids aren't going to know me. My family's not going to know me. I'm not going to stand for anything. I'm not going to be anything. That's not true. The other part of nothingness is everything. And in everything, the main energy is love. So basically, everything's just driven out of love after this sort of awakening. So your relationship with your children will get much better, much deeper, much more loving, much more patient, much more kind. The same goes for with your family, your spouse, your co-workers, everything. There's no more games, manipulations, anything like that, because that's all part of the ego wanting to control and make itself bigger and make itself grander and scheme for things and want things and get more and more and more. That's no longer a desire or a need. So even in work, it can actually improve because you'll be more authentic. You'll be a better worker. You'll dedicate yourself completely. You'll be more truthful, honest. No more cutting corners, anything. Everything's done with true integrity and true authenticity. So if anything, I'm saying there's absolutely nothing to fear. There's just everything to gain, including actually seeing everything around you for what it truly is, which is very magical, which is very beautiful. Although it's literally nothing, I mean, it's an illusion. This is as real as it's ever going to get. So if we're going to live here, we're going to live here as if it's real. Because this is reality. This is as real as it's going to get. There is nothing else. There is nothing else. This is it. As it's happening, as it's arising. But nobody's controlling it. And that ego that thinks that it is, isn't. So my suggestion to you would be, if you're experiencing a lot of fear when it comes to this message, is when that fear comes up. You know, we have the tendency when strong emotions come up, to maybe feel them a little bit, but then we try to distract ourselves or get away from it, from whatever's causing the fear. Makes sense, but in this case, it's really not something to be feared. It's something that's misunderstood, but it's not something to be feared. So when that fear arises, just like any other emotion, so if you're struggling with anger or any other emotion, sadness or something like that, when that arises, rather than just like turning off the video or, you know, staying away from non-duality for a while, or, you know, having a glass of wine, or turning on a different TV show or something else to distract yourself, be there with that fear, okay? Be there with that emotion. If it's fear, if it's anger, if it's sadness, whatever it is, sit there with it, explore it. Lay there in bed if you want. turn off the video, but I mean, you're going to sit there still with the fear. Explore it. Explore what it is, how it feels, where it is in your body. And then you can just lay down, close your eyes, identify it, and sit there with it until whatever happens, and then it passes. When that fear passes, what will happen is you'll feel a sense of relief, like, oh, it's gone. And you just get up and do something else. Or you feel, oh, like you almost forgot about it. Your mind is now moving on to something else. It's okay. Now you can leave it alone and move forward. And if you want, you can continue to watch the non-duality videos or explore that further now that you've kind of gotten over that fear. If it happens again, you'd do the same sort of thing. You'd sit there with the fear completely and totally raw, how it is, for however long it lasts until it passes. There's nothing to fear. And once you can get past that fear, most likely you'll have the awakening, because you're right there. The only thing that is keeping you from that realization is fear. So most likely if you have this extreme strong amount of fear, it's because you're literally right there. So you're panicking. So that's a really good sign. But I understand that, the fear can be a lot to deal with. But it's not going to kill you. It's not going to ruin your life. Sit there with it. It's just an emotion. I have a question here, so I'll go ahead and read it in case I didn't touch on any of the question. I'm sure I did touch on it, but let me go ahead and read it. It said, is it a painful experience having the sense of self fall away from you? It's not a painful experience at all. It's like a relief. When the sense of self falls away, it's like a total relief. Like you can finally relax. All of that contracted feeling of being the self, of being limited here in this body, the contraction just opens. It just stops. It flows. It either just opens up and flows away, or it opens up and explodes. And if it explodes, whatever happens, it's like a sense of relief. Okay? Yeah, it's not painful at all. It's wonderful. Okay, and then now the second part says, I have twice felt this happening to me, and I immediately contracted and didn't let it happen. There was just so much fear there. So that's exactly what we've been talking about. When, we get very, very close to this realization, the ego puts up its last and final fight, which is fear. The worst thing that we can experience is fear, because it stops us from going any further, and that's what the ego wants. But there's nothing to fear. I'm telling you this, and I'm sure any other non-dual speaker will tell you there is nothing to fear. There is nothing. So when you get to that point, remember just to feel into the fear completely, with the intention of being as afraid as you'll ever be, feeling that extreme amount of fear that's there, until it just dissolves into what it is, which is nothing. There is nothing to fear. There is nothing really there. You may even see through the ego and have that awakening right in that moment. So that is my suggestion to you. If you have the non-dual awakening and you find yourself struggling with something, which may happen. I mean, our lives just continue. There's things that I struggle with every day. There's things that happen every day. It's very wonderful, but everything can still happen. It just doesn't stick very long. So it's more manageable and light. But if you do have the awakening and you're very confused by some of the things that have happened or start happening, watch some of my previous videos. I talk about some of the things that I noticed changing in me. Now, they weren't scary, but I didn't understand everything. So if that's the case, maybe you can watch some of my previous videos and get some context to some of the things that maybe are happening with you as well. And I also offer one-on-one sessions to help you integrate and understand what's happening in this process. So if you do find yourself having this awakening but still having some sort of fear, which I find to be pretty unlikely, but if it were to happen, contact me and we can talk about it and work through it. You know, the ego always wants to make a comeback. Mine does every so often as well, but it's just so seen through what it is that it can't really do a whole lot. But yeah, I just wanted to share that with you because this is a very common question and a very common concern. Nothing changes. There's already no you. This whole time, you haven't been doing this. This whole time, the ego's the only thing you really need to fear is the ego, because it's the one that's trying to override everything and make it seem like it's in control and it needs this and it's doing that and it wants this and what could happen to it if this happens or this. And that's not a real thing. It's just an energy that's contracted, that's wanting to control everything, and it keeps your whole body contracted in this very limited sense of self. But when that's seen through and the ego has to back up or back away from where it is, you're free. You're not limited in this body. You become everything and anything. So you don't lose anything. You actually just gain everything. You gain everything. You become everything. You become intimate and in love with everything that is. And with that, you can't go wrong. Nothing bad can happen from that. Nothing at all. Your life is only going to really improve and improve and improve. I mean, it may take some time for some people or it might happen immediately, but it's on a course that is very safe, very loving, very magical. It's everything. It is life. So there is no escaping what is. You already not a person. You already are not a self. So there's nothing to fear. The ego is fake. It's never really done anything for you other than make you suffer and make you run around and do crazy things and chase your tail over silly things that don't really matter in life. So when this is seen through, your life will only become more meaningful, even though, strangely enough, life is actually meaningless, but it will become more meaningful. It will become more full. It will become more alive. It will become more love. You will be in more connection with everything and anyone around you. I hope you liked this video. If you have any questions, go ahead and email me at the description box below. Thank you.